You're listening to Music Mythology. My name is Sam Romo, and let's talk about some music. It's really nice. I enjoy it. All right. So now, moving on to Marvin Gaye. We can talk about his career as a whole. But obviously one of the biggest aspects of his career is turning from just being a pop star to more of a social commentary type of protest artist. Particularly with what's going on. But that was kind of has a big paradigm shift for how he approached music and also how kind of music handled him in return. He's a very interesting person. Grew up in a rough household, but was always still in contact with his family. Writes about his family a lot. When he's the writer, that's one thing I noticed about his catalog is when he writes the content, he addresses family stuff like a lot, pretty frequently. But his beginning career, he was in the Air Force. He was in the Air Force and was honorably discharged. Then he eventually met and dated and would eventually marry. Forgetting her first name, but I don't know if you can look that up. But his wife, Gordy, like we mentioned before,
Anna Gordy.
And she was the eldest sister of Barry Gordy, who was the lead producer for Motown. So through that, because I know Marvin Gaye was musical, but I don't think he was taking that as a serious career path. But through meeting her and Barry and further exposure, I know he was a drummer. I know he knew percussion. So through Gordy, he becomes a session drummer, and he does drumming. I know maybe for the Marvelettes, but I know at least for Stevie Wonder and I think the Temptations. But I know it's for sure Stevie Wonder. And then when they got married, I think it was the following year that they gave him a shot at doing the vocals. And then, he had his first success being written for, but performing duets with Tammy Terrell, and which their biggest hits were Ain't No Mountain High Enough and Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing. And I feel like I'm missing one.
Yeah, there's one or two more, actually, I think.
They had two.
I know they had two albums. The big singles. And I don't know too much about their relationship.
They were very close.
Yeah.
Yeah, he looked at her like a sister. It really hurt him because, like you pointed out, he went into deep depression.
Yeah, when she died in 1969.
He didn't. In fact, he didn't perform for several years.
That's right. He did not do live. He did not tour.
That's when he started growing his beard, and he kind of got away from his
pop look.
Motown pop look, and kind of became that look that we see him with. That kind of comes out of that period. Like you said, it's a period of pressure. It's a period of crushing. He goes through a deep, difficult time. Yeah, and his marriage, which probably either it contributed to his marriage falling apart, or his marriage was falling apart on top of what was going on. But he had a lot of things going on.
That's very true. Just looking at the album covers, he looks so polished and airbrushed. I'm sure his skin was just great, but he just looks, it's just like that old school, they look so perfect, like the crooner covers and all sorts of stuff.
When you see the Temptations and the Supremes and those bands from Four Tops, they're all wearing the same outfits. They're moving the same way.
Tuxedos.
Everything is choreographed. The songs are depicted. They're not saying write your own stuff and do your own stuff.
Yeah. Let's. This is a little bit of a tangent, but since we're just talking about kind of Motown and the dynamics of the music industry, let's talk about Smokey Robinson for a second. That he was a great writer. He was a great writing force, but then the label kind of took advantage. They took advantage. They did not give him a greater cut because he was producing, or no, he wasn't producing. That's the annoying thing. Is he was doing a majority of the legwork, but he wasn't doing the final production.
Yeah, submitted.
Yeah, and so I mean, they undercut him like in a lot of ways, but I mean, there's multiple artists that they did that way. But with Marvin Gaye, I guess his familial connection kept him in like a higher tier of like we were talking about, like when What's Going On happens. You have his new approach to society after seeing how American society treated, soldiers coming back from Vietnam, particularly, his brother's recounts. Like we just talked about Tammy Tramiel passing away, him recalibrating how he wants to, live his career in the music life. And then he wants to write about it. He wants to write about how he feels, how he sees things. And Berry Gordy didn't want him to do it. He didn't.
Well, I thought it was kind of interesting. And I mean, the stories that I read, it's like, so the What's Going On was originally like one song, and it was written by a member of the Four Tops. Mm-hmm. And it was going to be a Four Tops song.
Oh, wow.
So like, I'll Be There, like those Four Tops, like a barbershop quartet singing What's Going On.
Like What's Going On would have just been like a catchy phrase.
It was more upbeat or whatever. And it was an incident of like, they saw a police beater, the writer, what was his name? Ronaldo Benson. He saw like an occurrence with the police, and he's saying, "What's going on?" as a question.
Yeah.
And then I like a few of these quotes here. Like they gave it to. They were trying to give it to the Four Tops, and the Four Tops didn't want to do it. It was too political. One little report that said they even tried to give it to like Joan Baez, and she didn't want to do it because it was too political. So it's like, but he was in this mode when they came to Marvin Gaye. He heard about it, going around in the circles and said, well, let me see it. And the quote from Benson is, we mentioned him for the suit and he tailored the hell out of it. So he just like changed the whole song to make it not a question like what's going on, but it's like a statement of this is what's going on. Like, we're gutting through all these issues. We're talking about all this, And then Berry Gordy said it was like the worst thing he'd ever heard. Like, he didn't want to release it. Like, they just had the single. And then his like side, like number two man was like, well, we have it. Let's just print 100,000, see how they do.
Yeah.
And then it was like the first week it sold out. Second week, they produced another 100,000. That sold out in the first week. And so they're like, well, let's try a whole album.
Yeah. Well, like because he gave him a shot, because I know he addressed him saying
for the whole album.
Yeah.
He's like, but he had to be coerced into that through the sales.
Well, right. Yeah. But he didn't want to do it. And he was quoted telling Gaye that I'll do it, but if I do it and this tanks, you're done. Like, this might be your last move. And luckily it did pay out. But the interesting thing is, I think Marvin Gaye also kind of explained the album was most of it was written kind of like they would jam and they would set like a setting, and he was just kind of doing riffing poetry over the general music of what was going on. And that would kind of gave the that dynamic of because What's Going On, I mean, a lot of the songs kind of fit into that groove, but at the beginnings and the feeling of it, it's like it starts off like you're at a party. There's the talking and the good groove in the background, and then the speaker addressing what he wants to talk about. Anyways, so I always like that, because that is the feeling. It's got this very unique feeling of like you feel like you're in a group listening to it, even if you're by yourself, because there's like you hear all the people and the choir and the strings and the horns and all sorts of different stuff going on. And you have like tracks like Mercy Me, which is like, again, which is a beautiful arrangement and addressing a lot of social issues, a lot of corporate issues, all sorts of different things. But yeah, I mean, you could see how they could be hesitant because it didn't fit the pop formula. And so, yeah, they gave him that ultimatum, and then he killed it. And if I'm not mistaken, so What's Going On comes out in 70, right? 1970?
Yeah, 70.
And then 71, Motown gives him $1 million like bonus. They give him like some kind of like crazy like earnings. But they didn't want to do it again because he wrote You're the Man. He wrote that entire album, which came out last year. I mean, literally, they just released it last year. Yeah. And so You're the Man was his follow-up in the same context of what's going on. And I mean, and so they released a single, You're the Man, and it didn't do well. And that song isn't very, it's not like What's Going On, where it's still got that pop kind of feel to it, where it's still like, it gets stuck in your head. I guess that's the really, the melody wasn't really there. It was more of kind of what I was saying before. It's just poetry over music. It's not like this really composed thing. And so the single didn't do good, and so they didn't want to risk it. They risked it on What's Going On, and they came back to them in tenfold.
It's almost like doing a low budget movie, and all of a sudden it crushes, and it makes millions of dollars. So they're excited about it. But we want more of that.
Yeah, we want that.
Don't try something different, or don't.
That's the interesting thing to me, that because I love that album. You're the Man. I need to listen to that. It's a really good album. Like, my favorite tracks are Where Are We Going? That's literally What's Going On Part 2. I mean, it is literally that.
They just keep the same like music and going like
almost. It's almost like they took all the same session musicians and everything. They're like, all right, let's just change up our speed and notes we're playing in, and then let's just do it again from a different perspective. Let's run it. And I mean, but it's so good. Like, it's literally like, if you're one of those dudes that loves music, and I love my Ozzy Osbourne because he always does the same stuff. Which he doesn't. That's all I'm saying. But if you feel like there's that Ozzy sound and you look for it every time you listen to it, then if What's Going On is like your pinnacle of music, then this album is like falls right in line with it. But that one, Where Are We Going, is literally What's Going On Part 2. Piece of Clay is a phenomenal song. It's a slow kind of ballad, but it's about familial differences and trying to control other people. I mean, that's what the term that's what that means. Piece of clay is. I think the chorus is, everybody wants somebody to be their own piece of clay. And it's just it's beautiful poetry. It's an awesome song. And I'm Going Home is awesome. And a lot of it's familial. That's what I'm talking about. A lot of it is him addressing his own family, or just family in general. And then there's 2 Christmas songs on it that are very good. One of them is kind of like a slow blues ballad, and the other one's more kind of psychedelic. It's not like super psychedelic, but it's got really weird guitar playing in the background and stuff, or in piano. But it's the fact that the album wasn't released, even though like What's Going On had truly proven itself. I mean, literally, there was like, because I think it completely outdid like his 2 prior albums, but they didn't care. And so I haven't confirmed this in research, but just I had seen that they gave him like a huge cash bonus like that following year. So I wonder if they said, we're not going to release a second album, we're holding on to it, but we'll pay you. We'll pay you for the work and just move on. Like, this is not.
Well, I see that as Motown's way of, we're going to retain you because you're very valuable and you can make really good music that makes a lot of money. But we're still going to let you know that giving you this money, you're going to still kind of do the things we want you to do, which is, we're going to put that on hold. You need to kick out a pop song. You need to do something that's going to hit the charts, and you're still Marvin Gaye. And I kind of think it fits into some of the things we talked about with what was happening in the 60s, and with Buffalo Springfield, and with the civil rights and Vietnam. Gaye has gone through a great difficult thing in his life. He's looking at what's happening around him. He wants to respond to what's happening to his culture, to his life, but to what's happening in the country. And so he's at in a sense, he's at the pinnacle of his career.
Oh yeah.
He knows how to write, he knows how to sing, he knows how to produce, and he decides, I'm going to do it all. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this whole, because that's one thing you read about what's going on is, it was different in the sense that even a little 1 or 2 steps above Sgt. Pepper's or any kind of conceptual album. It just flows into each song. Everything just kind of connects to the thing before it.
Right.
And it's like he's like streaming his feelings and his music, but he's doing it in such a way that's so, that's melodic. It's pop. It's everything. It's doing it right, and it's doing it with that voice of his. So they know they can't lose him, because they probably realize, hey, this guy could go on and start doing things by himself. We better keep him. We got to do something. We'll give him a good chunk of money and let him know we want him. But if he's going to stay, he's going to have to do some of the stuff that we want him to do. He can't just start doing all this stuff he wants to do.
Well, I was going to say, because they just did Trouble Man was his next in, actual release chronological, he did Trouble Man, which was a soundtrack for this film that Motown was kind of like branching off to and really supporting, and they were trying to build up like that whole other branch of revenue for them. And so he did the soundtrack for that and kind of started like, that celebrity producer or whatever, this artist is going to do that. But that was his next one. And so Trouble Man is still, I think it's on. Well, I'm trying. I have so many like greatest hits of him. Is it on What's Going On? Or sometimes it's included in that, or it's just a separate thing?
It's its own album.
No, it is its own album, but I'm trying to think of that one song.
That's like on the deluxe edition.
Yeah, I was going to say that one song is sometimes included on What's Going On because it's so in line with that. But that was actually his next thing.
Huh.
This other article I found said that Marvin Gaye actually pulled it back from being released after the flop of the single on it and his sort of disagreements with Berry Gordy politically. But that makes me think, like in the 60s and the 70s would be even harder. So it kind of in contrast to like your Buffalo Springfield being able to say all these things like openly and point out and say, like what's wrong with this time. It wasn't quite the same for Black artists at that time in America to be that radical and then still try to have a livelihood. Yeah, because I was listening to it was an interview with LL Cool J, and he was talking about a time that actually like right at the beginning of Kobe's career in basketball, he was also trying to be a rapper. And it was like it wasn't his rookie, but it might have been a sophomore season, like his second season in the league. He was doing this like whole like legit gangster rap album. And LL Cool J said that like he met with him and was like trying to get feedback from LL Cool J or whatever. And he said, I listened to it all, and I just sat with him and said, you cannot release this. Like what you're trying to do, right? What you're trying to do is not going to be furthered by this. You're going to be labeled as this. You're going to be put in this, and this is going to mess up, the rest of your career in this, because this is not, kind of the voice that you can have at this time. Like you will squash any social capital that you have. And so it's just like to think about what he was doing in the 70s with this album. And like today it's not outrageous. It's still like poignant, but it was pretty outrageous then. Yeah. And Berry Gordy is like totally in his mind to be like, no, we're not going to wreck this whole ship. Like it's hard enough to do the music and to keep it popular and then to have. Right.
Because that was my perception of that dynamic of their label and their relationship.
Yeah, their particular relationship too.
Is that Marvin convinced them to take a chance. They did the single. It was great. They got the What's Going On album. It was wonderful. And then he turns out the next chapter of it. And then they're both just, they can't do it. And they don't feel like it's going to, it's like, it's shooting in the dark. They don't know if they're going to hit the target again and if it's going to have the same impact like it was before.
Yeah. And there's just no way. And I think the 60s and the 70s were such a time that it was like, a lot of things probably worked then that would never work again, wouldn't have worked before. But you just had such unrest and such sort of confusing things. Yeah. Because even, this was a little bit earlier, but you had an artist like James Brown, who's not necessarily like politically controversial. Well, not at all, but like socially, he was controversial. And when Martin Luther King was assassinated, like he's in large part credited for like saving riots in DC because he had a show scheduled that night. And he was like telling like, don't go riot, don't go out there. Like he was that voice of sort of conservatism and saying like, look, like we don't want to blow up all of our homes in all American cities right now. Like this is not the moment for that. So it's just interesting. Like, I don't know where, Marvin Gaye would have been on that in particular issue if that was, kind of his genre then, if like he was feeling the same when Martin Luther King, when that happened. I don't know if he would be a peacekeeper in that instance, but Berry Gordy and the moment was, we're making money right now. We're making good music. Let's try to not rock the boat and keep that going forward.
Well, but then the following year, or I guess 2 years later, it seems like that harsh or that rigid framework of that pop formula and what they were trying to maintain, they got looser about it, because then they started letting Stevie Wonder, I guess starting with like the Talking Book, be much more open and of a critic, and then social critic, and then also the Temptations, like one of my favorites of all time. Like you have them going from Can't Get Next to You, I think is that on Puzzle People, to a Ball of Confusion, which to me is it's one of my favorites. That's one of my all-time favorite Motown songs, because I love it better than What's Going On and as an entirety. I'm sorry, but that song to me, Ball of Confusion, is such a culmination of them touching on almost absolutely everything that was going on in that time. And it was like no holds bar. I mean, I want to pull up the lyrics really quick. I know I can talk about it more, but like because I mean, how many people were in the Temptations? Can you look that up?
5.
Yeah, they had the hand.
So you have 5. I mean, you have people moving out, people moving in because of the color of their skin. Vote for me and I'll set you free. Segregation, determination, demonstration, integration, aggravation, humiliation, obligation to my nation, a ball of confusion. I mean, and that's just literally the first few stanzas. But it keeps going, and so much of it is still relative to now. I mean, like the sales of pills are at all-time high. Young folks walking around with their heads in the sky. The city's ablaze in the summertime, and the beat goes on. Evolution, revolution, gun control, sound of soul, shooting rockets to the moon, kids growing up too soon. Politicians say more taxes will solve everything, and the band plays on. I mean, all of this is still right in line, with today. But I mean, I'm just saying, like, I love that song. That song is so high energy.
So, but that one came out, Ball of Confusion was 1970. What's Going On was 1971.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit before.
So was it? So I thought What's Going On was 70.
They started in 70 because they did that like single. It was towards the end of the year, and then 71 is when it came out.
Maybe look at the single dates, because I think Ball of Confusion was a single too.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Ball of Confusion comes right after What's Going On. Because I know they're right in that same time period, but that's the uptick in that availability of talking about more topics was Marvin Gaye and the Temptations. I mean, at least to me, but I mean, like the Ball of Confusion to me is such a pinnacle song of the time. Of you have 65 for what it's worth. Like we're saying, it's still kind of that palpable feeling of like you can relate to these things we're talking about. It's uneasy. It's the time of paranoia and the unease of everything going on. But then the Temptations, it's not just like a broad stroke approach to what's going on. They're like this, that, and this. I mean, it's just like it's a list of relative social dynamics that were messing with a lot of people,
spitting it out.
Yeah, but I mean, but the way they say it, and then to define the earth as not a collective, but just saying it's a ball of confusion. It's chaos. That to me, because that, like with me, like that's how I see. That's how I like to think about the world. Is it's all chaos. It's all a lot of people making a lot of decisions that lead to so much stuff, and the way they address so many accurate things that really control American society. It was just phenomenal. I mean, I remember hearing that song on the radio as a kid. And liking the melody, because the dun 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 dun, like it's like I don't know, it's a really cool groove. But then you have these phenomenal singers in different falsettos, different octaves. Everybody's singing a little bit different, and they're all saying their part. And I think, just like to me, What's Going On, starting off in that kind of the concept of it being kind of over a party in the beginning and stuff like that. It feels like you're in a group. You know what I mean? It puts you in that different kind of mindset. And with the Temptations of being a line of singers, but not just like a doo-wop, like they're going to sing the same thing and at different times. Like, no, they have their own point, you know, because like Can't Get Next to You, that's an awesome song in the same fashion.
Yeah.
They all have their own moments. They have their own licks about what they want to say about, you know, why I can't get next to you, what kind of, you know, I can make the seasons change just by waving my hand, you know, like they all have these fantastic lines, but it's the pop, it's pop love formula. But then you give them a chance, a moment to criticize what's going on, and they spell it out in that same nature, just bop bop bop, and they just bring it home, and that's one of my favorite Motown songs of that kind of, you know, era.
All right, so Wikipedia. Ball of Confusion was on Greatest Hits for The Temptations, like Greatest Hits Volume 2 or something like that. And it came out May 7th, 1970.
Okay.
What's Going On, the single, the first one was recorded on June 1st, 1970, and it was released a little bit later. And then they officially released it in 1971.
Wow.
Like June.
So they did it first.
Yeah, so that one song was out first. Or wow. January 20 was What's Going On. And then Mercy, Mercy Me, they released in June 1971.
Wow, that's crazy.
So it was about 6 months or so before.
That's crazy, because I never looked at the dates, just the year. I'd always assumed it would be flipped.
Flipped out.
What's Going On was the first chance that they took. So I wonder what that conversation was like. Let the Temptations allow them to take such a criticism. I mean, they talk about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and just throw it out there, like you said, that's one word, like blip, blip. Think about it.
Yeah, but all of it is so relative. I mean, they even talk about what's this line? Because I mean, they address the Beatles too. I mean, they don't address the Beatles, but they talk about. I just want to find it really quick. It's bugging me. I can't remember. Fear in the air, tension everywhere, unemployment rising fast, the Beatles' new record's a gas. And the only safe place to live is on an Indian reservation. It's just, it's crazy, because all of it, some of it's like, it's weird, because it's like nowadays maybe it doesn't, you have more insight onto like, maybe that doesn't make as much sense, but the tension of the unease is so palpable in that song. I mean, up to this point where it's like evil destruction, tax deduction, city inspectors, bill collectors, mod clothes in demand, population out of hand, suicide, too many bills, hippies moving to the hills, people all over the world shouting out in the war, and the band plays on. I mean, it's just, I mean, they touch on everything, and it's such a stellar song.
Well, I think of, like we touched on this earlier, is that you look at the producing, the studio, the production, the who's the driving force behind this group, and you see Gordy, Berry Gordy. You see him, you know, the Motown. They know they've got the sound. They're making the money, but they also realize, hey, people want that kind of thing. They want to hear music about what's going on. You know, what's happening in our culture, and they see it selling. And so, because I'm curious about who is it that wrote that song, because it wouldn't have been the Temptations. I don't think they wrote it.
Yeah, I was looking up that too. It's just the writing team for
Motown.
Yeah,
so yeah, Motown. Because it's interesting when you were reading that lyric,
and Norman Whitfield.
You said Eve of Destruction. Well, that was a song by Barry McQueen from the Byrds. He wrote a song called Eve of Destruction. So they're referring to even titles of songs and things that are happening specific, but then also just all kinds of different. So it's almost like someone writing a social, critique, like of all the little things that they see. But what I'm leading to is the Temptations obviously being highly successful and brilliant at what they were doing. I mean, they were a brilliant singing group. So they sing that, but then there's a difference between that and Marvin Gaye saying, I want to do a whole concept album. I'm gonna produce it. I'm gonna write it. I'm gonna play stuff on it. I'm even gonna be in control of the liner notes of the album. I'm gonna write stuff. I'm gonna do all of it myself. Well, now this is a scary thing, because you're letting an artist have that much control and power, and you're telling us how you're going to do the whole thing. In other words, you're not just talking about one song. Oh, and it's not just a pop song you're talking about. You're talking about a conceptual album, talking about society issues, the war. You're going to write about things that people we don't know if they want to buy that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you got to think the producers are looking at all these artists as investments they're looking at the ROI on everything. They want to see the return on investment. And Marvin's been a great asset to the company.
Motown is the hit machine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kicking out songs that are big money.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I want to point out is he's doing, in a sense, if I may refer to this way, he is the first time you see black artists responding on the level of the Beatles. He's doing something that he's in control. He wants to make observations. He's going to create all the music. He's going to write what he wants to write about.
But I thought that Ray Charles had that before.
Well, if he did,
he wasn't doing anything. But
not a concept.
Ray Charles did that and then went into did that country album that flopped.
Yeah, he might have referenced certain things, but Gaye is doing it on a level that's like the Beatles doing Sgt. Pepper. In other words, well, what do you mean you're going to do that, and how are you going to do that? And
it's like what I was talking about the other day. I'm forgetting what the album is even, but the album right before What's Going On is it's pure pop.
It's all pop.
It's pure formula, and it's so crazy because it's to me, you listen to the Beatles, you can see, or you can hear their progression. You can watch their ease in the psychedelic era, or into being critical of certain topics and yada yada yada. All their different fashions, you could watch it unfold. But with Marvin Gaye, it was much more like pop, and then boom.
Yeah, this came out, and
this is him.
It's over.
This is really him.
Yeah, and the way that they were producing things, you just had so many songs, and you did year after year after year after year. You were releasing something because it was, they weren't, the artists themselves weren't writing all the songs. You could have just 15 songwriters, and they're
that was the crazy
we just need this. Get in here and sing it. Let's go.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing of music at that time, because that's what's interesting. For me especially, because I had no experience of that, and my perspective on music output was the artist led the charge on kind of how frequently they would do it. You would have super driven people, I'm just talking about modern artists strictly, 2000 on, Portugal the Man, that they just love what they're doing, so they would release an album every year just because they loved it. They were just in the creative setting. But you have other people I don't know, you say Coldplay even, that they would take 2 or 3 years and work their way up to the next one, workshop it or whatever. There's so much more critique and heavy work on what you're producing, and Sgt. Pepper was kind of the changing of that guard, of that approach to music. Because I remember in interviews and recounts I read about that time period of the Beatles not touring, and then they were in the studio for a year or 6 months, when it would have taken them a month or 2 weeks to spit out their next album. It took them half a year because it was so much studio work. It was production. It wasn't just we have it all written, come in and just perform it, and that's what's different about McCartney's first album with Wings, is they do it the old school approach. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but with their first album is kind of wonky. It's very different from the later on albums, because they did it old school. Fast. They showed up and they performed it and recorded it, cleaned it up, and then that was it. There was no okay, now you do the piano by itself and we'll fill that in the beginning. No, they didn't do that. You come in and you perform it, re-record it, and then we'll cut it, and that's it. And so with Sgt. Pepper, you had all this layering and intense studio work, and that inspired people like Brian Wilson. With Pet Sounds. I can't remember what he says, but I'm pretty sure he said he went to at least 4 different studios for particular things. I'll go to this studio on the east side. That was in that documentary. Yeah, because the strings sound so much better out of here. I'll go out of here because the vocals are better here, and you could be more particular. Yeah. And so, but it started to prove itself. You know what I mean? And so you have this weird balance now. I imagine the labels had to address of do we give them a lot of time to like really work on something and make it complex and new? Or do we stick to the same formula every 6 months, pump it out? We have the writing team, we have the session drummers and the artists, just knock it out.
I think it depends on the labels too.
Absolutely.
Because they, you know, some labels were more underwater in different areas and they needed like, I need an album like right
consistency.
now.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
You don't have the time to,
it's money.
Maybe just like recouping.
It's investment. Yeah,
recouping that cost of like when they did the math on some of these artists of like how much you put into an album and promoting it to like when, you know, that artist will get royalties. It's like, you know, millions of dollars before like it's sales that the artist has to have before they'll make that money back and actually like see those returns on the end without doing shows or whatever.
Right.
It's like just album sales. You have to get so many points and so many dollars. It's like, unless you're doing that, you're not worth it. And so like I sign a contract, you get 3 albums and it's like, well, I need that money real fast because we've promoted you.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're going to stay on the name that we've created with this album. So get this other one out so that you can still be biting on that. We don't have to like basically dig a deeper hole in order to promote, you know, for this album and
that's
do that out.
The interesting thing about Marvin Gaye and right before what's going on is he's not touring. He doesn't have his proven duet partner. He's independently struggling with depression and all these things. And, you know, it's an interesting thing that maybe that was it. Maybe, again, his familial tie to Barry, maybe that was the leniency angle of like, you know, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you're not doing your job? You know what I mean? Like, and for them to give him a chance, you know. Now, again, that was the method is release the single, the album follows the single, and it will, you know, tie it all together. And they had success with the single. But it's almost very surprising when you see the dynamics of the industry at that time of that they gave him a shot. They let him try it. And who knows? I mean, the fact that the Temptations had that single before him, you know, maybe the fact that single didn't tank the Temptations, you know, maybe that was another inch towards that angle of like, okay, well, Marvin's already uncalibrated. We have another, you know, premium artist that just released a single in the same kind of manner, and it didn't kill it. You know, it didn't end anything. So let's give him a shot because we got to get our guy back, you know. But then he goes on. That's the interesting is he has a live album of what's going on, and he performs it in the same manner of the album. But when he does it live, he's in the suit again. He's shaving. It's like he goes back to the old thing. So I wonder if that was the negotiation of like, we're going to do this to get you back in the vibe, and then. But you're still on our label. Don't forget about that.
Well, in a sense, it's kind of like you dress the way we know it appeals to your audience, but you can do your music. Just don't come out looking like a hippie. You know, don't come out with your beard and looking ratted out because they're not ready for that. Yeah. But I think at the same time, they're recognizing, hey, these kids that used to like those pop songs, these are the kids that are in the colleges now. They're the ones that are protesting. They're the ones going to Vietnam. Yeah, we better release music that appeals to them because we want to keep the machine going. Yeah. We want to keep going.
Well, like I touched with Buffalo Springfield, that was very much a strong dynamic in the market. The music market was the youth. The youth was buying more music than anyone. And that's what started to change the focal point of the culture.
Industry changed,
or any culture, like media culture, I guess, is if you're gonna focus on what to market off of what's selling the best. Well, the youth were buying the most, so they were starting to offset and making a new aggregate of like it's not just the oldest existence that holds the most importance of opinion. No, it's the aggregate. It's the what's at the top of that curve of who's buying the most. Well, it's the things critiquing the times as we see them. It's the things were changing,
and it has to be an artist who can pull it off musically, who can do it with it and make it in a way that people want to listen to it. Yeah. In other words, sorry, Yoko. I mean, it's not going to be someone who they may make music, but nobody wants to hear what they're doing because they don't like their style or they don't like the way they sing.
Well, and that's the phenomenal thing about people like Marvin Gaye or John Lennon or anyone that wrote these very heavy critiques of society is the reason why they're still on their greatest hits albums for the entire label or yada yada or they still hold relevancy today is because they were masters at their craft, and now you're giving them a chance to introduce their true perspective on things that give them anxieties, that make them human. Right. Like, let's put it like that, right? It's like, it's not just like, oh, that's John Lennon. He's, everything he writes, it's got to be, the next big thing, or it's got to be something that no one's ever said before. But no, it's actually not just that. It's a very human moment. It's a very personal admission to how they feel about things. And especially, I don't want to change the topic, but especially like with John Lennon, like you see him go from this pop icon, like the leader of the Beatles, and he slowly slips out of that, that role. And then, but he's still a driving force for the Beatles, but he's not the one telling them like, this is how it's going to be. Like, this is the direction, because you didn't have the same producer dynamics with Epstein and all these other people. But by the time John is free of it, he's over the fame. He's over the fame of being a Beatle and what that means, because people would come to him, talking to him like they knew him, but they don't really know him. And he's just over that position in his life. And then when he makes his first solo album with the Plastic Ono band, half of it's like protest music. He makes a single, Power to the People, Just Give Me Truth, and that eventually went on to Imagine. But in that first album, you get a glimpse at the real John Lennon. He talks about his mom. He talks about his relationship with Paul. all these crazy things. But it took him to move out of the producer world.
I just think that's kind of the nature of commercial art, though. You're always going to have that give and play, like, movies now. How they talk about the state of movies is saying like, we're going to like workshop it. So they'll make a movie, and then you have those screener audiences. And if it's like good or bad, like they'll go back to those notes and whatever. Like, they're doing that for music, except there's just fewer people, kind of in the room and saying like, well, this is the taste that we're kind of going after. This is the deal. Like, sure. Oh, you're going to release that.
For him, because I'm saying like that was his first solo album. You're stepping out of the pop world. I know like his world was different, because at those last few years of the Beatles, they had a lot of control over their own output. But now it was, I don't have to agree with other people. This is fully my poetry. This is fully my perspective. Like, like his song God, where he just, tears apart so many things that he doesn't believe in. Like, he doesn't find factual truth in. And he just lists them off, and then ends it with the Beatles and just the fact that he believes in himself and the future that he can create. You never got that. You never got that because he had to agree with everyone else in the production. And so as soon as you give him the freedom to do it, then you get the real insight. Now, is it true? Is all the things he's saying true? Well, I don't know. That's just the way he's going to work it. But any artist wouldn't get momentum that way. But he had the momentum.
I was going to say, yeah.
John
I still think like that goes back to like how we produce them. So it's like you need a whole bunch of people to at least be on board. There's some like individual artists that are just like, wow, you're so awesome. Like, just sort of go forth and do. Yeah. But a lot of times it's like, well, yeah, I'll take this song and, work that, and then you'll build that up. And then like even to John Mayer's first album, I don't think he wrote like the actual lyrics and stuff. Like, I didn't think he was writing until maybe the third or fourth. And then he sort of dropped off on that like major pop scale, but he was still a talent, right? So he was able to do what he wanted to do here and there, and then just play music. So I don't know, I think it's the commercial art aspect of it. Like, even if you're by yourself and you supposedly have that, like, you need at least a room full of people buying onto you to sort of
absolutely
do it.
Well, because again, we're talking about return on investment, and at that time, this isn't modern times where like it's very cheap to put stuff on streaming, and because streaming itself is a low income type of scenario anyways. But at that point it was a huge investment. It was physical marketing, it was physical media, everything was physical. A lot of stuff was physical records, physical billboards, or you had to tune into the 5 channels that were available and watch the talk show, and you had to hit the bill on that talk show, and you had to meet their rules. It's like, to be on the show, you can't play the song, you have to rewrite that lyric because we don't like that. The TV show doesn't like that.
Absolutely.
Like with the Doors, like when they played Light My Fire, they told them you can play the song, we want that specific song, no others, but you cannot say the line, girl, we couldn't get much higher. Don't say that. If you don't say that, we're all good. And they're like, okay, cool. And then Morrison was like, yeah, no, that's like a part of the song. That's our song. And so he sings it on live TV and it rolls. And, but that, there were so many rules at play there. And that was the interesting thing about the Beatles is like what we were saying about just a little earlier about comparing them to Bowie and just their understanding of society and yada yada, but their experiences, them being impressed upon by other artists, whether they're musical or painters like Salvador Dali or whoever they're meeting, or Andy Warhol, or all these eccentric people. But that was like the high end society. You can't just check into Andy Warhol's Twitter and get to know who he was. You had to know him. You had to be in the group. And that was the cool thing about the Beatles is they would take that exposure and that impression, and then they would flood their music with it, their art, and they would bring that renaissance or that experience to the masses. And whether on purpose or on accident, it gave people a bridge to that level of artistry, of expression. And that wasn't typical because it's not that wasn't marketable. And then the market started to shift to what the youth was interested in. And then the Beatles at the same time, in the same era, they had their own label. They bought it out. They were the owners. They steered the ship themselves. And so they started talking about whatever they wanted to talk about. But with Marvin Gaye, it's interesting because he continues to be self-expressive and change his sound and I don't know, he didn't waver, like he didn't because I know he produced a lot of his stuff from that point on, but it wasn't like
well, then he's single and then he goes into the sexual healing mode, and that's kind of all with the latter.
He goes from one end to the other.
And what's that about? Like, I wonder why he.
I think it reflects his upbringing, because his dad was a Pentecostal preacher.
Just the fight of
so he was raised in a spiritual environment, and I think I'm sure he came up singing gospel, and then he starts to do pop, and I'm sure that was considered by people that he grew up with to be bad or not the kind of music that they think he should sing. And then he finds his own voice and he starts to do his own thing. But he has I think his swings are from what he felt like he knew from the spiritual side of things, but then he would go to that sensual side, sexual healing and, let's get it on. That he could do that. And then they find out, wait a minute, this makes a lot of money. We make these songs and man, people are buying like crazy. So he's like, yeah, but what about what's going on? And okay, you can sing that too, but you got to drop some of this stuff because this is what the people want. And, Gaye was smart. He knew the industry and he saw that's how you had to do it. You had to do some pop, you had to do something. And again, this is Motown, this is the hit machine. This thing is driven by hits. And so, and he's probably feeling somewhat obligated. Obviously, they dropped a big chunk of money on him. So he's going to kick out that money. He's going to kick out the songs that make money. But at the same time, he has that personal side of him that can be very spiritual, personal. He wants to do that. He wants to, but he knows, but I can't do it all the time because that's not going to necessarily make money, and he doesn't do what the Beatles do. He doesn't make his own label. He doesn't create his own recording studio. So it's interesting with him. He's an interesting dynamic of he finds his own niche, but he still has to deal with the power of Motown and the influence of what a music machine does, a hit machine does. And you see him in his own struggles with his ups and downs and his problems that he has.
When did he pass away? Was it 80? Was it 83?
Right. Just was looking it up. Let's see. 84.
Okay, yeah, 84. And it was his dad, right?
Yeah, his dad.
Do y'all know what that scenario was? Like why that
happened? I knew it one time, but now...
Because wasn't he staying with his parents? Like at that point?
He was staying with them to take care of his mother.
And his dad could be very volatile.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if it was because that's the way he was, or maybe he was dementia. You know what I mean? Maybe he was losing it.
Well, I mean, he recounts like it was never like a healthy relationship in any sense. No, he was always volatile and physical and a highly aggressive person.
Yeah, and I guess it was just like a fight over different finances and different things that were happening and just got out of hand. And
he shot him, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. No bueno.
That's crazy. Yeah. But I mean, he's a pretty eccentric person.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be, I don't know if there's any like comparison to him and that sort of shift politically anyway. Of any other artist, like this started out as kind of one thing and then did that.
I mean, that's why I brought up Lennon, because he's the only one I could think of. But Lennon had more of a transition. Like you could see it happening.
Yeah.
Him talking about revolution and with the Beatles and all these other criticisms. But it's like the reason why I bring it up is because as soon as he was free of the Beatles and he was the full-fledged writer, direction, that's like a majority of what it was social criticisms and protest, addresses.
Because with Marvin Gaye, this seems just like that 1, 2, if that You're the Man when it came out, like, that would have been 3. Yeah. That would have been the only 3 albums that were like that, of like the 17, 20 or whatever that he was on. That's interesting. Maybe Sam Cooke, but Sam Cooke didn't have a whole protest album. He kind of had like a...
The change is going to come.
Yeah, like a over of I'm hitting you on the top with this all throughout the music. You just love it. I don't know if anybody else had that turn like that.
Yeah, because I feel like anyone else, for the most part, honestly, post 70s, I don't know. This is a very broad statement, and if this becomes an episode, please people correct me. But I mean, anyone else after that, I feel like they start off that way. Like if they're going to talk about those topics, that's their first step, anyways. I mean, this is more modern, but like I'm thinking about people like Rage Against the Machine and certain rappers that like right on the front first stage, first album, that's all it is social criticisms and critiques and stuff like that. Because I'm trying to think about other artists that transition from more of a pop.
What happens too is some of them do it, but they can't pull it off. It's not successful.
Yeah.
Because some people won't accept that particular artist dipping into political views, social views, criticisms.
Or it isn't authentic anyway.
Yeah, they don't feel it's authentic. They don't feel it fits his style. Marvin Gaye pulls it off because his voice is, it does something that you listen to him because he has that uniqueness in his voice, his ability to sing. But it also shows his ability as an artist, as a musician. He's producing, he's writing, he's creating, he's doing all these things before the Motown machine did that for him. And so, but now he's doing it just like the Beatles. They're going in and saying, we're going to do this and we're going to make that. And we're going to touch this and create that and do this and write that. And people aren't going in there and saying, no, let me rewrite that. You can't do this. No, you're going to do that. So again, you see that it's unique in some of these artists, but some artists try to do it. People just don't accept it. They don't. They're like, we don't want that. We don't want you doing that. It doesn't fit your image or. Yeah,
or you have someone like. Well, I mean, there's a wide variety, but just another icons you could throw out there. It's like Neil Young, that like almost a majority of his albums have like one song at least that's like critical song of society or the current president or an incident that happened in American history or whatever. I mean, you could throw out so many with him, like Ohio and Keep Rocking the Free World, and there's a bunch, but or just to see how he interacts with the crowd, like you said at concerts, where like he'll go on a rant about what's happening right now and his criticism of the current president, whether it's Bush or whoever. But he's kind of always been that. Like even with Buffalo Springfield, like it was a more subtle, maybe broad kind of touch on things. But then as he got more independent, he was much more precise on what he wants to criticize.
I could say maybe Green Day is one I'm finding.
Oh, that's true. From just like punk rockish to American Idiot.
Yeah.
It's true.
Well, I think of it's kind of an odd example, but you look at Marlon Brando, who is known for being a great actor, and so when he gets the Oscar,
that's right. He has an Indian.
He rejects it. He sends an Indian woman out, an American Indian woman, to read a statement. Yeah, he rejects the Oscar, and he says it's because of the treatment of the American Indians, and so instead of people embracing it, they reject it because they're like, "Come on, you're Marlon Brando. What does it matter?" We know
they see it as for as a stunt.
Well, and not only that, he's known for being over the top and flamboyant and full of himself. So they're like, "So you want to be socially interested?" And
you want to do this.
We know you're more interested in yourself than you are the American Indians. So I'm saying sometimes it doesn't come off right because they're like, that doesn't fit who you look like. Well,
it's almost like if you tried to do that today, I feel like a lot of people like immediately in the YouTube comments and Twitter comments would be like, you're just doing it for its profitability, or you're jumping on to the times as they are.
Are you doing it as a launching pad for your next career, your next move, your next album, your next movie? You know what I mean?
But those are real games.
Yeah, they are.
Play.
Yeah.
I mean, like Kanye. Kanye is a phenom at that type of game of going out to the public and saying doing some kind of stunt that's just jarring enough to get attention, and then a month later he drops his album, and it's like,
so he kind of did the opposite though. He started out more political than he is now, or has been.
I feel like he's still pretty political, dude.
But not in the music. Like what he actually stands for is like in the art anyway. He was more
like what's translated
in what he said, in what he said and the things that he was working with at the beginning. And then he was, just a fool outspoken with the Katrina and whatever. I mean, if he just wants to be everywhere, in that mix and in that circle, he's definitely, I guess, political now, but not in his art per se, unless this is all a setup for the next Kanye.
Right. Well, I mean, but literally, that would be a great episode too, to try and dissect the history of Kanye's like marketing, not ability, but successes, like things that, like with Trump, that I've talked about this with other people, that like Trump has really kind of hijacked the media formula of he'll say things that are rough around the edges, but sometimes I feel like he'll do it because he knows it'll get rippled. His face and his message will go everywhere, and then he'll stay in the media. He'll stay in the loop. I mean, he's already in the loop because he's the freaking president. But if he does a little extra, that little spice on something, then he's everywhere, even more so. And I've always been familiar with that ploy or that play because of Kanye. Because
I don't know if you think Kanye is doing those like
intentionally.
Yeah, like cynically almost, of saying like, I'm going to say this because it gets like, I think Kanye is the type of person where it's like he just will say these things in that moment, and this is 1,000% what he believes. But there's just been putting it forward.
I mean, there's been at least that's why I want to kind of dig into that more, because I know, just because I've been a big fan of his since 2009, and then onward. But I've just seen so many moments of him doing something or saying something, just having some kind of media stunt, or a perceived media stunt, and then literally 6 months to a year later, his album comes out, a new album comes out, and I know he's just a highly televised, he's a big personality, so it's gonna be in there anyways. But I don't
think that he's I would label Trump as more cynical, like just meaning there's a separation from what he might privately think to what he publicly says, and the reasoning behind he might say something. I don't think that Kanye has that sort of cynical relationship to his public persona.
But I feel like Kanye's aware,
calculating it. I think he's like,
I feel like he knows. He knows though to stay away from certain outlets, but then he entertains them right before he's going to do something. And then that drums up. But okay, so I guess this is what I'm really trying to say is just like any other artist, that they'll go on Jimmy Fallon because their book's about to come out, or they'll go on Jay Leno because their movie's about to come out, whatever. He does that, but he does it very loudly. Like he'll do it, he'll come out to the public and then do something or say something and like drum up interest in like a major way. Because I mean, he'll say some weird stuff on his Twitter anyways, but then there'll be something where he'll go on TMZ and then all of a sudden say, you know, whatever, and then all of a sudden, you know, 4 to 6 months later, his album comes out.
See, but I also think of that as being like, he wears like his stress on his sleeve, he wears his heart on his sleeve. So if he's working hard about something, that's all he's going to be about. And if they're giving him a platform, like, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to be like super weird and like, you're going to know about this, like, you know, just how he hypes everything that he does.
But then he's a member of the Kardashian family, and I just feel like that's, you know, Chris
now they are very cynical, I feel, but they come across as semi-genuine
and do work the market.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, but no, yeah, that's what I'm saying, and so that's why I just feel like that's what I'm saying. I want to dig into this.
But Kanye was doing that before.
No, I know, but I know he was. But that's what I'm saying is that's why I want to dig into it more, because it's hard for me to recap some of the timelines, but because I've had this conversation with multiple people about how it always seems like he does something really just out there enough, and then he releases something, and like, I mean, a lot of, like, just like the phrase of any press is good press, that does apply to any artist. I mean, any major artist, as long as you get it out there, then awesome. That's what you're trying to do, is get it out there. I mean, I don't know how we got here, but it's just, I don't know, another interesting person. But sure. You could talk all day about that guy though. But yeah, I don't know. It is interesting though, like to see someone from that time period, going back to Marvin Gaye, you know, be such a accomplished, you know, fitting that formula, that music production formula, and just doing phenomenally. But then wanting to take the reins, you know, himself after having a heavy season, like we just talked about before, of being under pressure, of, you know, losing people, losing your appreciation for maybe a certain form of society, or losing your comfort in society, because you're realizing, like, even my own kin that went off to war thinking that they're doing the right thing can't even come back and be received well. And then, you know, a close friend dying and not having control over your own career paths, because you always have to meet the bill of someone else in order to even be seen by the public. You know, I mean, that's just like, I can only imagine how frustrating that could be, especially, again, not being in a public seat like he would be today, that if he had a 5-year pop career, he'd have 1 million followers already. So as soon as he wanted to stem off into his own thing, that'd be a pretty easy approach. But then it was like, there's so many people that he has to keep in his life to just keep that, you know, level of success. And then he nails it. So yeah, I mean, what's going on is a phenomenal album, and then You're the Man is also very good. I mean, some of it you can tell it's a compilation. Like, it must have been some loose tracks that they had that they threw on there too that they never got released for him. But I know a majority of it was supposed to be the follow-up album, and it's very good. Again, my preferred tracks off of that one are Where Are We Going? That's literally part 2 to What's Going On. Piece of Clay, that's a great approach to, you know, his perspective on relationships and stuff, and control. And then what was the last one? I'm Going Home. That one's an awesome one, because to me that song almost sounds like he was just coming out of that era of, I'm kind of over it, and he kind of wants a simple retreat. He wants a simple solution, like anybody else in the world. I want an easy one. I want to go home where it's easy.
He's being spiritual, you know. In other words, I'm going home. I want to just get out of here. I want to know I'm going. I want to know where I'm going, and I want to go home.
Somewhere familiar.
Yeah, to the place that they talk about, the place at the end.
Green pastures.
It's over. I mean, I'm tired of stuff. He had to have been tired of certain things at that point.
Because, again, that's a familial song. He's like, I'm going home to see my mother, going home to see my dear old dad, going home. That's the main chorus as he lists off how he's, and that's the interesting thing about that song is it is a very intimate song because he's not just talking about the excitement of going to see his family. He addresses each person he's going to see, and he says exactly what he's going to do. I'm going to go home, put my arm around you. I'm going to go home. Like, that's the whole thing. The whole song is him listing the people and what he wants to do, and that expression, especially during that time. To me, it just gives off the feeling of that's what he really wanted. He wanted the simplicity of the family dynamic, and he never maybe had that. We see
with mega superstars, like we talked about, about comparisons of Michael Jackson to Marvin Gaye. You look at those guys who lived in such a massive, high energy, top of the charts. Everything's theirs. They can do whatever they want. So sometimes they're living in lives of excess or demand, where it's like Michael Jackson. All he knew is being a kid is you got to kick out those songs. You got to get those songs. So things are taken from you, childhood, normal situations. You don't have normal situations.
Right.
So it could be that explains Marvin Gaye's dual personality. He has that normal side of him that's like, you know what, I'd love to just go home to be with my family and to enjoy normal things. But also, I'm a part of this wild world. Well, I'm partying, I'm doing whatever I want. And those two would clash. And you can see it in his music, where sometimes he's very spiritual and very about familiar things. He's talking about common stuff, but then he just wants to talk about sexual healing. And that's, so is that not, that may be marketing, but it's also that side of his personality that was like, hey, this is the wild side. That's that, hey, I'm that, but I'm this.
Yeah.
And so you see him, and then you see it in those those legendary people, where there's part of them that wants the normalcy, but then there's a part of them that has become accustomed to the craziness of that world that they're.
Well, it's like we're talking about with bleeding artists is that's when they become more relatable. It's like if you're talking about human things, human stressors and anxieties, or just pleasures, it's like that's when you'll become more relatable to your audience. Is maybe not trying to make it sound so simple. Maybe that's how you become a good pop ticket, but to become relatable and sensible and heavy.
Right.
That's a big achievement in music. Yeah. Well, yeah, one of the best. Well, you don't have anything else? All right.
That's it for me.
Yeah, that's a good one. A classic. I don't have one of his albums in physical. I've been waiting because I want to find his.
I should have brought that.
I want to find a real one of what's going on. Yeah, it's a good one. Awesome. Thank you for listening. For more episodes, visit our website, musicmythpodcast.com, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Goodbye.